Okay, thank you. It's Friday, the 3rd of December, the Finance, Economic Development, Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee. If I can ask all members to put their phones on silent, please. To the agenda, are there any comments from members of the public? Comments from members of the public? Okay, no comments from members of the public. Item 2, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Gloria Johnson. Councillor Jackie Smith will be substituting. Apologies also from Councillor Philip Knowles. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just Councillor Robert Reid was intended to be present today in relation to agenda item 9, but he's unfortunately can't make it, so he just asked me to offer his apologies. Thank you.
Okay, I also believe that Councillor David Bellamy has sent his apologies. Are there any other apologies in the room? No. Okay. Moving on. Item 3, are there any disclosures of interest or dispensations in the room? No. As a reminder, you can declare dispensations or disclose interests at any stage in the meeting. Item 4, action notes from the previous meeting. Are there any comments on the action notes of the previous meeting, September the 7th? Okay, there are no comments. Do I have a proposer that they are a true and fair record? Thank you, Councillor Whittington. A seconder? Do I have a seconder? Do I have a seconder in the room that is a true and fair record of the meeting? Well, I was there, so I'm happy to second that. So all those in favour? Any against? And any abstentions? 3 abstentions, but three in favour there. So those action notes are carried. Item 5, updates from the previous meeting. Are there any comments on the updates from the previous meeting? Are there any comments in the room from the updates to the previous meeting? Okay, then I'm going to move on to make some progress. Thank you for those updates. Item 6, the corporate plan key performance indicators. This is in the hands of, this is with Ken Lyon. Ken.
Thank you, Chairman, and morning, everyone. I hope you're well. So we've got the corporate update on the corporate plan and the key performance indicators. So just to flag that there's 2 elements to this report rather than just the normal performance management looking backwards. There's also a looking forward, because we've undertaken a corporate plan review. When I say we, mainly Ben has undertaken a corporate plan review alongside the senior officers. So just to highlight Ben's role in that, to review the actions in the corporate plan and the performance indicators for the coming year, to make sure that they're the relevant and right. The relevant and right actions and indicators going forward. So therefore, there's 2 elements to this. So one is looking back, and the other is looking forward. And those the 2 recommendations around to note the looking back and to approve the looking forward. So I'll start off with the looking back, and what I'll do is I'll go through those and then invite comment. And that's those are the items in Appendix 1. So I couldn't remember if I'd put another appendix in, but those are the items in Appendix 1. So we'll take comments and questions on those as we go, and then once we've done those, we'll move into Appendix 2. So just as an overview, there are 13 actions in the scope of this committee, and what this is the mid-year update. So it's up to the end of Q2, and of those actions, 6 are rated green, which show that they're on track or exceeding their existing targets. 6 are rated amber, and I just to highlight, it's 6, not 2, as is said in the report. That was a typo. So 6 are rated amber, which indicates that they're slightly off target, or that they're behind target, significantly behind target, but got a good mitigation plan in place. And we're expecting those to be back on track within the next financial year. And then there's 1 action which is rated red. So, and just as an overview, it's probably worth highlighting a couple of areas of positivity and a couple of areas of concern to the committee, and then I'll hand over to you to questions. So positively, you'll see within the report that the action related to St Martin's Park, so that has been presented to planning committee, which was approved, subject to an obligation related to affordable housing, which is expected to be completed over the obligation is expected to be agreed and completed over the coming weeks, which is obviously significant progress on a very important project for the council. And the second bit of progress on another important project is around the depot project, where the team and the consultant team are in place and they've been produced a milestone plan which the council have been able to review, and they're expecting that over the coming weeks concept drawings will become available. So there's a couple of things that have moved forward significantly there. In terms of the areas of concern, so we've been reporting almost ever since we started reporting on the corporate plan, the red action around the university centre, which is now really bright red because of the changing priorities around for the university and the way in which the university sector is operating post COVID. So just to flag in the future, look for the report, we're proposing to remove this action because we don't believe it is now achievable, and we need to look at different ways going forward. So it's not a relevant action to have in, but that's to flag on being read. And another area just for focus from the council is being the developments around the Southern Relief Road. So obviously the Southern Relief Road is being built in Grantham, and that's taking place. However, there were some targets around developments linked to those that were behind where we were expecting them to be in the corporate plan. Those are refreshed in the new corporate plan, in the new revision to the corporate plan, but it's probably worth highlighting those now. So that's just a kind of brief overview of the looking back, and I'll hand over to questions. And it looks like Councillor Dilks has got one coming in from a friend, so I'll hand over to the committee.
Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, first of all, if I look at the plans around the education, delivery of growth in our economy, page 7, and the fact that obviously that's in red and we're saying that it's potentially not achievable. I'm concerned about removing things because they've gone red. My understanding of the point about these reports is that's where we then focus on them to get them delivered. So, and start working on what the issues are, or understanding what the constraints are around that. On that particular item, I noticed that we're saying that we are unlikely to completely fill the space at that site, working with the university centre. So what I'd like to understand is who is making the decision about what other uses there will be for that site, because certainly as a Grantham councillor, I think the Grantham councillors should be involved in that exercise, and I certainly haven't been contacted about that. And I have in fact made a previous request to the Chief Executive along those lines. So I have got another one further up, but if I stop there for a moment.
I'm keen this doesn't turn into a dialogue, Councillor Morgan. Do you want to ask your second question, and then we'll...
The other one, if I may, I picked up an issue regarding apprentices, actually, which you didn't mention in your summary there, but we seem to be off target there, and I wanted to understand why. We have, in my view, a very low target in the first place, given the size of the council. So how come we haven't achieved that target? What's the obstacles there?
Okay. Ben.
So yes, thank you. Just on the apprenticeship side of things, the target for the year is the 10. We're halfway through the year so far, and we've already had 6 new ones starting. So there is another 6 months for the remainder of that target. At current, it is on track to be achieved. Rather than being behind, it's just that the target presented in this report is a year-end figure rather than a mid-year point.
Thank you for that.
So with regards to the university centre, so there's people who are closer to the university centre than me, but the reason that the proposed, so you're exactly right, Councillor Morgan, that the aim of the performance reporting and the management is to address issues and to tackle them and to look at different solutions. I think that which is exactly right. However, where there's instances where, having explored different solutions, that the previous plan doesn't appear to be deliverable or appears to be outside of our control, that's appropriate then to remove the action. But I have to say, I'm missing I was expecting an officer closer to the university centre than me to be here, but I'm not sure if Alan or Richard, who's also just left the room, are able to talk a bit more about the university centre, because they're a bit closer to it than me, I think.
Robinson.
Thank you, Chairman. So with the university centre, obviously the plan was always to work with Lincoln University, and that was the initial plan, that we would always do that. This report's not about what we might do with that space in future. It's to say that what we won't be able to deliver is the joint working with the university on that site, because the university, due to the way they've changed the way they work over the COVID pandemic period, no longer see that as the way they want to work. So they're definitely not going to take up a tenancy on that site, and hence that's not a deliverable action anymore. We've had a great deal of negotiation and debate with them, but they're very clear that that's not going to happen. Of course, there needs to be a decision as what we do with the space now, and that will be dealt with through the normal decision-making framework of the council, once some proposals or options are considered. So I'm not just sitting on that, we are working through those things, but at the moment, there's nothing formal to come through to Councillor Morgan or others, but we will, of course, consult as we do in the normal way for any decision that we make. So that's the reason for the change in that. It's not about, because our action's not about using that space, it's using it for that specific purpose, which is no longer possible.
Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak on this, because I've got personal experience of this, because I'm currently towards the end stages of doing a part-time master's degree in history with the University of Lincoln. And I started off pre-COVID. We were having normal face-to-face tutorials actually at the university. And then COVID struck sort of halfway through. And literally within 2 weeks, the University of Lincoln went over to fully online options for seminars and for tutorials and things like that. It invested in an awful lot of software, which they made available to students via the website. And in a very, very short space of time, the university have completely changed their model of the way they provide courses, which actually has gone to a similar, adopted quite a lot of the lessons that the Open University have used around distance learning and things like that. So as a student, obviously, it's not quite the same experience as actually being there face-to-face with other students and whatever. But during the COVID period, it worked. I think post-COVID, university realised that they do have the software to do this, they do have the technology to do this. And if they can provide courses from Lincoln that students anywhere in the world in effect can access, what's the point of having a university centre in Grantham? So on that, Mr. Chairman, as I say, that's just my personal testimony. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Ken, if I can just push you on Charmaine's first question there as to what actually happens with these reports. What are the outcomes these reports are trying to generate? Who is taking decisions? What frequency they're being used? And how are members being engaged with that? Are these reports for officers' consumption with member updates monthly, or how? What's the outcomes? I think what Charmaine was driving, Councillor Morgan was driving at there with one specific case, but I think that applies to all of these reports. Frankly, how are they being used?
So the aim is, and I perhaps should have included this in my intro, but the aim is that the performance reporting and the delivery against the corporate plan drives the agenda of the the overview and scrutiny committees. So where there's items, so realistically, this is a kind of high level overview of a number of items, and where there's items that the scrutiny committee feel that they would like more work done, or to understand it more, or to explore it more, this provides that kind of that overview to enable you to do that. So an outcome. So there's two things. One is generally at a high level, comments from committee members are taken on board and are able to be taken forward. But secondly, should you request, having looked at the performance report, more information, or want to debate or have a fuller session around an individual item rather than around the whole piece, they can then be added to the future work programme. Perhaps we've not been as explicit about that as we should be, so I'll make sure we include that in further introductions. But if you look at the work programmes, generally they have been informed by the things that have come into the corporate plan from the corporate plan into the committees. So that process is working, even if I haven't highlighted it as well as I should have done.
Okay, we might come back to that. I'll come back to Ran. Councillor Dilks.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It is, of course, very disappointing that, you know, Grantham's not going to get the university, or, well, actually, it doesn't say in the report we're not going to get it. It says it's on hold. And I just wonder if we can be a bit more, if it's not going to happen, let's say so, because, you know, the empty space is there, and presumably it can be let. So my question would be, and I remember the blaze of publicity when it was announced that it was going to happen a couple of years ago. How long has that space been empty? And what's the potential loss of income to this authority, in not being able to push that forward? How much have we lost in the last 2 or however many years it is since we expected them to come? And did they have no sort of obligation to come at all? Or was it just a sort of a dream that it might happen?
Is this a question for yourself, Richard?
It can be. In terms of the implications, members might recall that in the budget for this financial year, there was a growth bid of 75,000 that was built in as the new cost strain of that space continuing to remain empty. That was in respect of picking up the business rates for the premises, but also the holding costs and operational costs of that space. We'd never built in the income projections for it because again, at that point and the earlier point, the granular detail of how the university space would be used wasn't actually locked down. It was going to be a kind of pay-as-you-go model. So there wasn't my understanding was there wasn't going to be a formal lease in that sense with a fixed rate. It was going to be a pay-as-you-go model between ourselves and the university, but of course that never came to fruition and was never legally locked in. So there's been a theoretical income loss, but nothing that's impacted on our budgets because it never got to the point of being put in our budgets. But the operational cost of the council now picking that up as a cost is £75,000.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just, that's per year then, Richard. Yeah. So what's the total loss? I'm not sure if it's 1, 2 or 3 years we're talking about.
Richard.
So I think the space was, well, the cinema opened in July 19. I think the space upstairs was being, I'm trying to look at colleagues here. I think it was probably only Ken who it goes back that far. I think the upstairs space was still being configured, so the full year cost only actually hit in 2021 and 21-22.
Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I was very disappointed when things sort of went sour with the university because I think there's a vast amount of publicity at the time which didn't do us any good. And certainly didn't help us to see about the selling or using of the shops, which still are empty. However, I think that once again, we should start to look at things forward, not backwards. I can think of at least 5 schools, senior schools, almost in this town, that are desperate for space. And one of them would be within walking distance, which they already have in the opposite direction. I'm talking about the King's School. They are desperate for space. You can walk out of their doors and almost into the route along to the river. And that, I'm sure, would bring us something. We've got two big projects coming off, one at the north end of the town, the centre they have there with possible housing. And the other one is at this end of town with the centre, the new village in the centre. That surely is going to want some additional stuff. We are promised, I believe, that there will be education facilities there. Why not try to use the education facilities that we already have? And then our losses should be minimum. The other thing is that we could perhaps look at, and it's more or less in the centre of the town. We keep saying that we want a new this to develop the town, we want a new that. We've already got some building there that could be made to do something quite useful and to attract more people into the area. We've been talking about a new museum for a long time, a gallery, a tourist attraction. And let's just see, before we start pulling it all to pieces, see what we can do, because we've already spent that, in effect. And let's just get it moving, because nobody really did much work on trying to get people looking at that. And I'm sure that there are small businesses. It could be made into a small business centre. It's already up there. All we need to do is get somebody in there to run it.
Okay, thank you for those comments. So I'm detecting this might be a useful addition to our work plan. Actually, there's a lot of interest in this element of the report potentially in the new year. Are there any other comments on the actual report from those that haven't spoken? I will come back to people. Okay, I have a number of comments. First of all, it's a very long report. I found that a lot of these I didn't feel should be on the finance growth, economic growth and overview and scrutiny committee, but I'll take a deep breath here. So the long report, get your pens ready. Item 3.5A, we're dropping the implementing transformation strategies. Have we given up on that, basically? Is that the reason for that?
Councillor, sorry, that's the future plan is, we haven't come on to that yet. I just wonder if we should get to the bottom of the looking back and then go into the looking forward.
Okay, so you'd like me to hold my comments?
If that okay.
I'll hold my comments then until you've done
but
that.
I'll look forward to
maybe you won't look forward to them, but I'll circle back with some closing questions, and then I'll come back to the comments. Councillor Morgan, with note that we've only heard of half the presentation here.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the item regarding the building around the I'll call it the building around the cinema complex, because that's, I think, what we're really talking about. It was given a label around education. Education isn't actually a function of this council, it's a function of the county council. And I think we need to start being very careful, especially with budgets in mind, etc., what we're focusing on, although I totally supported that. But I'd like to pick up on the point that Councillor Jackie Smith has made. There are other options that Grantham actually has no community centre in the centre of our town and has been desperately seeking one for the uses of our communities. The other purpose, which Jackie mentioned, which I've been pushing with the tourism committee, and also other offices within this council, is the heritage. 4,000 historic artefacts were found on the Spittlegate Heath development. 4,000 covering everything from Viking, Stone Age, Saxon, Roman burials, buildings, it hit the national news. They found some Roman things
Councillor
in
Morgan,
Leicester.
I think these are all very valid points. I think rather than cover them in passing, I think this actually merits an item on our work plan early in the new year.
If I might then just
Please,
just move forward. So, but picking up Jackie's point, there are other purposes other than offices, which I was quoted by the Chief Executive. I'll be shocked and disappointed if it becomes office space. But I think it's very important that we keep it on here because, as Jackie pointed out, it's not just the space on the upper level. We also haven't filled the lower level. What a missed opportunity. It need not be empty now. It could be used, even if it's by us and by our communities now. It need not sit there empty, especially if we're paying £75,000 for it a year. And because of that, especially, it should remain on our report under our magnifying glass so that we can move forward with it.
Councillor Dilks.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to come back, Joan. It's really, I'm just seeking an answer to the point I raised about us being in limbo. You know, 2 years of negotiations have gone on. Surely the university can be quite clear and say, no, we're not coming, or yes, we are. And without that commitment, it makes it very difficult to, doesn't it, to let it to somebody else. But the paper says that the opening of the university centre is on hold. Well, from what we've heard, it doesn't seem to be on hold. It seems to be it's not going to happen. Now, you know, I understand the reasons, but we just need to sort of be clear about it and honest, frankly.
Ken, can you be clearer on that point? Is that accurate, or is
so I think, as Alan's report said, I think we at the moment we need to look at other options for the site. We don't think that the university centre is a viable option for that site. It's my understanding. So you're right. The language should have been clearer, and that's helpful. Thank you, Councillor Dilks. But I do think I agree with the chairman's view that having that there's obviously a lot of interest in the item. I think as I say, the point of the performance indicators is to drive the work programme, and I think it's identified that this is an area that the committee would like to consider going forward, and the relevant officers who are involved closely with it will be able to present a report on that.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I am going to go through my comments actually, because a lot of them are about the report. As I say, well, starting at page 24, I mean, this is symptomatic. I think a lot of the actions on here are not specific enough, and I see this on several other reports. My fear is that non-specific actions always end up green because it's impossible to say they've not been done. I think we have to have specific actions, for example, to partnership and coordinate with the LEF. That kind of isn't really specific enough. That's always going to be green. That's on page 24. Moving forward with reds on 26, I'd like to see more happening there. There ought to be more actions there if they're anything to do with us. Implementation of a COVID recovery plan, again, I think that needs thrashing out or binning from this because it's just too generic. That there's delivery of customer service experience. Again, that's just one action which is repeated. It's imprecise. That's always going to be green. I'd like to see some detail on that. Or if you can't come up with some detail, get it off of there. There on page 31, the procurement action is just measures developed. Surely if that's completed, those measures generated some actions. You're very keen to interrupt me, by the way, but I'm going to keep going. Review of the council's assets on page 32. Is this the outcome? £50,000 disposal value? If not, then what are the actions off of this? And again, I found myself repeatedly on page 38, that's a communities page, page 39, that's for the environment. And I found myself repeatedly thinking, why is this on our So there's a lot of positives in this. The only thing I'd like to add to what you said is although it's interesting it coming to our committee and informing our work plan, it obviously needs to go to the senior management team to redirect resources away from greens and towards reds. So that's the other outcome I was expecting you to hear or to hear from you when we were talking about outcomes. But general, I think most of it's fine. I'd like to see more specifics. I'd like to see more actions around the reds. And I'd like to see less in front of this committee. Ken, if you want to give the second half of your presentation, please. Thanks.
Fine. Well, could I answer your questions first? Because the second half of the presentation is meant to answer some of those questions. So I think we recognised in the first review that when we set the corporate plan up that some of the targets weren't as specific as we wanted them to be. And what we've tried to do in the review is we've got a year's more knowledge of doing them is to make those targets more specific. So the second piece has got a lot more. The appendix 2 has got a lot more specific targets in than the equivalent piece of work had when we first set it up. So we wholeheartedly agree with you, and I'd like to sort of actually thank colleagues in corporate management team who've been really helpful at helping to shape what those targets might look like and best practice elsewhere. So because they've been really well engaged in that. Other than to say, I agree with you, but I think we've already tried to remedy that element, Councillor. That's the first thing. In terms of the second item, if you believe that things shouldn't come aren't in the scope of this committee, please tell us. Specifically ones you'd like moved out of it. I think that this committee has quite a broad scope, so you could argue that almost anything could come into it. So if there's specific things that you'd say actually. We don't want that in this committee. We think this is more aligned with others. Tell us, and we will. I can't definitely say we'll agree to it, but we would negotiate. We speak to the other committee chairs about that. So because I do agree that there are a lot of actions within this. And in terms of the second part of the presentation, I suppose what we're looking for you to do really here is support this revision. So we think the review that Ben, myself, and the corporate team have undertaken has improved the quality of the performance indicators and made sure it's relevant for the year going forward. So we're looking to do. We're looking forward. We're looking for you to approve that. In the cover report, which I've just closed off in front of me, we highlight a couple of things that we've amended, that we've removed or added in. So there's a couple of actions, for example, the Future High Street Fund action and the HAS action. We've chosen, we believe that those two actions were falsely put together. They're two quite discrete things, so we've separated those as being separate actions. We've also added in an action around the support packages, action number 13 on high performing council, around support packages for districts' most vulnerable residents as well. And we've mentioned some of the things that we're planning to remove. So they're either because they've been completed. So I agree with you about the COVID recovery plan. So we think that was set up expecting to become more defined, but actually it's become part of business as usual and being embedded in the economic in Invest SK in the economic development department. So we've suggested just removing that altogether. So in general, we've just got the focus on the things that we think are the realistic priorities for the council over the next 12 months. So really invite comments on that from the committee.
Okay, are there any comments on the changes? They all seem sensible to myself. Are there any comments in the room? Okay, does anybody require us to vote on this? I don't think so. I think that they can be taken as given. Okay, thank you for that. And as I say, I think we can submit comments about which ones we think could be out of scope of this. I think in general, less information that's higher quality would be better than this wall of information. Yeah, but a useful report. Moving on, item 7. This is the budget monitoring report, and this is with Councillor Stokes. Thanks.
I'm going to pass straight over to Richard Wiles for this report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. This continues the series of reports that are presented to committee to provide updates on the financial position for the current year. This is as at the end of September, so that's clearly Q2 or period 6 for the financial year. And just by way of update, even though you can see a slight deterioration or movement in the deficit, there is more positive news as at the end of October. Members might be aware we do monthly monitoring of budgets, and obviously we periodically, as the timetable allows, comes to the committee with updates. But the forecast position as at the end of October was 933,000. So that has been a positive reduction on the forecast, and obviously we've just now got into December, so we'll be doing the same exercise and review as at the end of November. So we're hoping now the direction of travel will become slightly more positive as we get closer to the actuals. Clearly, every month that passes, we're into actuals rather than forecasts, so we expect a more positive position as we progress. So the headline is, as at the end of September, it was really relatively stable, so no further worsening. And of course, the main thrust of the deficit has been around income reductions rather than overspends on expenditure, and that's been a theme throughout this financial year as the key income areas for the authority struggle to keep or at least retain current levels, but also get back to pre-pandemic levels, and that's most felt in car parking, the arts, and also in terms of the market service. The few areas that have held up throughout the whole period have been green waste, development management, and just to a slightly lesser extent our licensing and our commercial ventures. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but the government had recognised previously those income losses, and they had introduced an income losses compensation scheme. But members will note from the report that's only been extended 1 quarter in this year. So it was in place throughout the whole of last year, but they've only extended it for 1 quarter. So from the 1st of July onwards, the income losses are falling squarely on the shoulders of the council. So that's just something members need to be mindful of. And it's primarily for that reason that council agreed to set up the COVID recovery reserve, which is just over £1 million. And members will recall earlier in the year, we came back with the agreed criteria as to when and how that reserve would be used, and clearly that's going to take the main strain and the fall on the shoulders of that reserve for the losses we're seeing through the income reductions. We've continued to note the savings we are achieving through the hybrid working. Obviously, we've got a fairly small teams actually on site most days, and that shows itself through less travel claims for business travel, less printing costs, less postage, and those sundry kind of expenses that ordinarily would be incurred. And that's showing an overall forecast movement of nearly 92,000 reduction, which is significant. It's almost a quarter of the budget there. So that does need to be captured as we go back into whatever the new normal might look like, because clearly there are changes in the way staff are undertaking their services, and we clearly don't want to lurch back to those habits that clearly have changed from a positive financial perspective going forward. In terms of general fund programme, that's relatively stable. It is a £2 million forecast underspend, and the main contributors to that are Deepings Leisure Centre or Weather Pitch, which will be moved into next financial years to continue the narrative around the Leisure Centre in the Deepings. The decarbonisation grant that was returned back to government due to difficulties in meeting the deadlines that government had set out, and that's primarily driven by the sector's inability to respond to the material requirements that would have delivered that scheme. And also we're forecasting a slight underspend on the disabled facilities grant monies, although that would be ring-fenced and retained by the council for future demands, so that we are seeing a movement on that. And the final one is shopfront scheme, and that's mainly because the Heritage Action Zone grant is taking the load of that funding, so that relieve some of the pressure on the council to obligate to meet those costs. Less movement on the HRA revenue side. Ones to note are slight income reduction, albeit 400,000. It's a 1.6% movement, and in terms of the expenditure for the HRA, less significant movement, but some pressures around repairs and maintenance coming through on the material side in terms of the procurement and the pressures that we're seeing on there, and some interim arrangements in terms of staffing and using some external support to bolster some gaps in the establishment for the HRA. We've talked previously about the HRA capital programme and the ongoing challenges around the new build agenda. That continues to be the narrative. So you can see on page 70, a forecast movement of 11.3 million compared to budget. But the consolidation of that and the lessons learned will be taken forward into the 22-23 budget proposals, and a lot of the capital focus for the HRA will now be heavily leaned towards the stock condition survey findings that will be due to the authority over the coming weeks and months, which will reshape and reprioritise the overall HRA capital programme. And then finally, for completeness, you'll see the collection rates on the bottom of page 71, which hopefully provide some assurance stat in terms of the key income areas of rents, council tax and business rates. The council is holding its own in terms of where we expect to be. The one that's slightly more volatile is the business rates because of the government interventions around the reliefs. You'll probably recall in this year, the hospitality retail sector are on a sliding scale of support. So they're now at 66% support, which means they're paying the 34% themselves, having been 100% funded by government in the first half of the year. So there is a sliding scale that's putting some pressure on collection rates, because clearly that sector hasn't been in the habit of paying rates now for a year and a half. So it's just moving them into that new space. So, but overall, the collection rates are holding up pretty well given the overall circumstances. So I'll pause there and invite questions. Thank you.
Councillor Morgan.
Yeah, thank you. If I can just touch on the car park for a moment. I noticed the Grantham car park situation is not looking very good for the revenue. I appreciate that there was an impact from COVID, but there were also changes, which actually led to an increase quite significant increase actually in the charges locally for parking in the town centre. Have we done any work to identify if the reduction in use is all down to COVID, or if it's actually also as a result of the increasing in the charges? Have we done any research there at all?
Richard?
To be honest, I'm not entirely sure how we could decipher between the two. Clearly, as you say, there was a tariff introduction increase from April 21, but also in that first period, as you know, we were still in a lockdown position primarily. So there was always going to be an adverse impact on utilisation of the car parks. What we're seeing in the car parks is very much consistent with other authorities, and nationally the narrative is very similar. I think it's incredibly difficult to separate out the impact of the COVID and the restrictions and people's behaviours and shopping habits post-COVID versus the impact the tariffs may have had. All I can say is previously when tariff increases have been put in, we haven't seen the kind of impact we're seeing now. So even if there is some element of that, I don't think we could lay it squarely on the shoulders of the tariff increase, because in the past it's been fairly immune to tariff changes.
I will come back to you, Councillor Dill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Richard and Adam, for the report. I noticed this morning, just even in, is it Welland Street car park that we were parking at the back of the cinema, it's just half empty, So a real sort of concern. I don't know, if we are getting back to it, but I've never experienced the car park so empty when I know the pandemic's not over, but you know what I'm saying, it's a concern. The question I wanted to ask though was, Richard or Adam, was on and forgive me if it's in here, but I couldn't find it, is that sort of headline cost of COVID to date to this authority, given obviously there's some savings, there's the government grants that have come in, but there are significant losses that we know about as well. I'm just kind of looking, what's the overall headline figure of the cost to date of COVID?
Richard, are we in a position to make those sorts of calculations yet?
I mean, we could do, as I say, for every budget line that's changing, we can make a subjective view as to whether that's a COVID-related issue or if that's just a change in circumstances and the environment around us. It is incredibly difficult to pinpoint accurately every single budget line difference and say that's because it's more sophisticated than that, isn't it? And like you've said, people's behaviours are changing. I'm just looking at the fees and charges. Actually, Wellham Street only changed by 10 pence for 3 hours parking. So how much of that 10 pence has turned motorists away from that car park versus people's patterns of coming into towns are different is incredibly difficult to kind of decipher. We do continue to analyse where, I mean, the income losses are more tangible in terms of, so the art centre's being closed, so it's obvious the income's going to suffer if people can't visit the location. So we can pinpoint quite accurately in some areas, but the overall picture, whilst we continue to review, is difficult to analyse without doubt what's a COVID-related issue and what isn't. But we will continue to review, and if the committee, as we get through the end of 21-22, wants that kind of post-mock-up, then clearly we can do that.
I think that might be a useful appendix for the year-end accounts. Councillor Sandal.
Thank you. Yes, the car parking issue I notice is very low at Stamford, but I don't think it is anything to do with cars parking. I went down there Tuesday afternoon and I couldn't find anywhere to park down Bath Row. But the other issue I find a lot of people complain is the actual machines aren't working. And that is where you're losing money because people aren't paying. And also, we have noticed how many more people are now parking in the residential areas rather than in the car park because A, they can't find one, or B, they're concerned about not being able to use the machines, or they won't pay the increases of it. And then, of course, you're not getting anything at all from them, are you?
Thanks for those observations. Are there any other comments on the report? I will return to those that want to speak again. Just a couple of comments. Sorry, Councillor Worthington.
Yeah, sorry on this, Richard. Obviously, we do have the COVID reserve, and I think this is sort of an understanding of how it works, because I know that I suspect that the recovery from COVID is going to go a very, very long tail, actually, and that potentially, I suspect, we're still going to see impacts in future financial years as it take time. But I'm assuming, because I know the government, at the moment, haven't announced any further COVID grants to local authorities. I mean, not sure in the light of maybe moving into some sort of restrictions now, if any future funding would be made available. But obviously, let's assume that of the £1.2 million reserve we've got at the moment, if the trajectory carries on as it is at the moment, going down, then maybe we use half of that, and the other half gets carried forward. I just think it's a really difficult, challenging situation for us because it's this long tail, isn't it? It's not knowing exactly how long it's going to be until all the effects are worked out of the system. So I don't know if you sort of want to just reassure the committee that actually potentially there is some reserves there to cover it, but eventually at some point they will run out. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think very much we're in a period of adjustment, and the long-term implications on the budgets that previously have been relatively stable and immune to any kind of changes may not ever come back to pre-pandemic levels. And during our briefings around the budget preparations for next year, we've been quite clear that the budget levels for car parking, in our view, need to be tempered down, because, as we've said in the report, car parking capacity in Grantham is only running at 65% of where it was, and Stamford is around 80%. Now, there has been more, as Councillor Sandal said, there's been some positive progression towards more like 90 in Stamford, but Grantham's not seeing that same recovery rate. So we are going to quash the budgets for certainly around car parking for next year. In the short term, we can offset that gap by using legacy reserve money, but obviously that's not a sustainable strategy to adopt. So over time, if those budget levels will never get back to, say, where they were in 2019-20, well, we're not 1920, then we will need to adjust our budget framework to meet those new levels.
Fine. Are there any other questions? I just have a couple of observations myself. The financial risk register, this was done right at the start of the pandemic. I think it's probably would be a useful exercise to return to that and redo this for the next iteration of this report, because this risk register sort of reads as if it's over a year old. Just because I think the risks have changed as you've outlined. Just one other comment as well. You mentioned that obviously going back to the new build programme on page 70, we spent 3 million of an 11 million pound budget, and that there are lessons learned there to be carried forward. What are those lessons? That's perhaps a question for Andrew Cotton. I'm not sure. What are the lessons for our inability to deliver on a new build programme?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to give some thoughts on that. I think that in terms of the broader context, obviously, as a strategic housing authority and as the biggest stock retained landlord in the area, clearly we want an ambitious delivery programme and we want to be building new homes, and that's, there's complete consensus on that. I think that has to be tempered in terms of the financial capacity for us to deliver, and Richard has touched on that in terms of the stock condition survey. I think also the ability of us to make sure that when we commit to programmes, commit to a capital programme, that those are projects that are going to be brought forward. I think that delivery and the management of those projects is something that we're on a learning curve within the service. And I think that, bringing reports to committee in future years, I think there'll be a different approach in the sense that we commit to a project and we deliver on it rather than having to report on underspends. So that's part of us looking at our structures as well and our internal sort of, officer governance of that.
So that sounds as if the lesson is that the budget was too high. You'd be looking for a lower budget next year. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the reserves that we've got within the HRA, clearly they're good. We're in a stable and relatively strong financial position. It's where we prioritise that spend, and our first responsibility is towards the tenants who live in our homes.
Fine, thank you. If there are no other comments, I'll just take a couple of closing statements and then we'll move on. Councillor Morgan, thank you.
Thank you. I think perhaps what Councillor Dilks was driving at earlier and I was leading to was with regards to the COVID situation. And I think Councillor Whittington's also touched on this very, very importantly. I think it would really be helpful to see if the government funding has actually been adequate to support our council given the impact of COVID. I think that's COVID past. And I think Councillor Whittington's comment is really, really valid. I was going to make it myself. And that is that, and I know I asked this question of you recently, Richard, have we got any indication that the government is going to come forward with more funding, given it looks like we're going through now the beginning stages of another round, potentially, of COVID and the impact that it could have? Certainly where I work, it's now hitting us really badly. The point about the parking was I think that one of the big areas, or perhaps the changes that may have occurred against the past, is that the impact on incomes has been quite significant. And I think there's another pinch for us as a local authority there. We might see that further down the line and start to see real issues. I think we're being told that the average household now is going to lose £1,700 a year income, especially hitting the lower income households, of which we have a significant number in Grantham. And I can see that picking up the issue about the car park, I think it's indicative that actually people are choosing to go where it's free to park. They're parking on the streets. And may well not be using the town centres at all. And that to me is, I think it's obviously clearly a risk for us. And I wonder what work we can do to identify where that might, how bad that might be.
I will take a response for that, but I'll get some closing comments from Councillor Whittington first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of areas. The first one really is, I guess, just to clarify with Andrew, that I'm guessing the first call, if you like, on the HRA capital is going to be, obviously, we've committed to some new builds. And I'm guessing after that, the next big call on that will be results of the stock condition survey and what that throws up. So just a question would be, how long do we think it'll be before we get that and have to start committing some of that reserve? But I'll just finish with my other closing comment, which is, I guess, picking up from what Councillor Morgan has just said, in terms not only of car park income, but just in terms of high streets as a whole. I think I seem to remember at some point during the pandemic reading that that now nearly 35% of all transactions in terms of purchases are now done online. And sort of pre-COVID, it had taken perhaps 10, 15 years to reach 10, 12%, but the next 10 to 12% increase was a matter of a few months. And it just seems to be that high streets were already under pressure pre-COVID, but post-COVID now, I just think a lot of people have started now to source other ways of purchasing stuff. They're discovering that actually online stuff potentially is cheaper because a lot of the online retailers don't have the overhead costs that a high street retailer would be. And I know on our work programme we have got high streets and whatever. And of course at the moment the county council, as Councillor Dilks will know, I'm not sure if it's your panel or the other one, is doing this review of high streets. So I just think that the whole high street model has changed, and this will have an impact upon our car park income and a whole variety of other stuff. So that's my closing comment. And then obviously just the answer to that question from Andrew. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Richard, if you can address Councillor Morgan's point.
Yeah, I'll probably refer to Andrew on the stock condition question, but in terms of, I think that conversation kind of supports why it is difficult to pick out, the particular question about car parking reductions, is it COVID related or is it about the tariffs? That's why it is difficult, because it is about household incomes being squeezed. It is about changes in shopping habits, and it's all of the above. So I think that's why it is difficult to pinpoint specifically the implication. But in terms of the question about had the government support been sufficient, the income losses scheme, which we have talked about at this committee on previous occasions, the headline of it was only 75 pence contribution for every £1 loss. But the detail of that was the government expected you to absorb the first 5% of the loss. So for every £1 loss, only 95% of it was eligible. And then of that, only 75% of it would be reimbursed. So you're down to 71 pence already. And any other areas of support that the government gained, such as the furlough scheme, the arts recovery grants, they were then discounted away. So in other words, government wouldn't give grants twice. So as you work your way through that, the actual loss, the actual income we got was 140,000 contribution towards a variance of nearly 700. So no, the short answer is no. In terms of income losses, the government scheme wasn't sufficient. There was an expectation from government that it would support some of that loss, but it would expect authorities to take some of that hit as well.
Okay, and Andrew Cotton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to come back to Councillor Whittington's point. Yes, certainly in terms of that impression we've caused in the sense of balancing that new build programme against the capital investment, yes, that's absolutely the case. In terms of the stock condition survey and sort of future capital programmes, we do have a paucity of information in the sense of our stock and in terms of the elements, the significant capital elements of the stock. And that reflects the fact that the stock condition survey hasn't been run for a number of years. We're doing 100% of the stock, give or take, in this financial year, and we're on track for that. That will lead to a complete refresh of the housing revenue account business plan and asset management strategy in next financial year, which will give us that sort of stable programs looking forwards over the next, say, 5 years. We will also make sure that we're surveying 20% of our stock. So over a 5-year course, all the stock is resurveyed. That allows us to keep that rolling housing revenue account business plan up to date with good quality information. And clearly we'll be working very closely with finance colleagues in terms of bringing those that draft plan forwards.
Okay, I do want to make some progress. Councillor Dill, so you want to make a final comment? Make it brief, please.
I'll try, thank you. I've been trying to catch your eye for a while, but thank you. It was on the page 70 that I think you looked at, on the delivery of new houses by the authority. And I note that 15 are expected to be completed this financial year. 2.5 years ago, we announced in a blaze of publicity that we were going to build 300 affordable homes and spend £30 million doing it over the next 5 years, delivering, as I say, 300 affordable homes. We're halfway through that process now. How many have we actually delivered? And is that still the target? Has the target changed?
We'll take that question. Andrew Cotton, do you have the answer to that?
Yes, slightly predates me in terms of that commitment, of course, but off the top of my head, I think that we've delivered in the last financial year 16 new units. That sounds about right. We've got the 15 this year, and as we've already covered, we need to reset our targets in relation to new builds.
Will a report on that come back before this committee about our new building and where we're resetting?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to make some progress then. So if we can move on to item 8, the council tax support scheme, item 8, and this is with Councillor Stokes.
Yes, thank you. I will pass to Alan Robinson shortly, but the report in front of you is to review the consultation responses and comment on the proposed changes to the localised council tax support scheme in 22-23, as well as the proposals made in relation to the discretionary hardship fund and discount for care leaders and special constables. But I'll pass over to Alan Robinson, who will present.
Thanks, Councillor Stokes. Thank you, Chairman. So this scheme should now be starting to be familiar to you. So we've been dealing with this now since, I think, 2013, and certainly it's been to your previous committees when we considered what modelling you'd like to take place for the various potential alterations to the scheme, and then agreeing the recommendations to full council before the consultation went out. I think that the Cabinet agreed that in September. So it is something that you should now be starting to become familiar with, and it is kind of a fairly standard thing that we're doing these days. The consultation did go out, and broadly it's supportive of retaining the current scheme. So that's really what this is telling us. By the way, this is all on page, I think it's 83 of your pack, so if people are trying to catch up. Out of interest, I think on the next page, on page 84, if you look at table 1.6, it shows that actually the amount of the scheme that we can control is about 26% of that, equating to about, for us, about £170,000. The rest of it is for vulnerable people and for people of a pensionable age, which the government insists that we maintain the original scheme, more or less akin to the council tax benefit that was payable prior to 2013. I don't intend to go into any more detail, Chairman, but I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, are there any questions in the room? Councillor Dill.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to talk about the special constabulary council tax discount scheme that we originally, the Cabinet this year, as you recall, decided not to go along with the PCC's request. There was, a sort of backlash, if I can call it that, from myself and Councillor Ray Wotton and a couple of others supported it, and full council, and it was changed, and we agreed to go down that route. I'm very disappointed though that it hasn't actually delivered any results this year. And it seems to me that, you know, a scheme was announced, and I'm not blaming this authority, but a scheme was announced and it hadn't been thought through. And I just think it is I've got a special constable, who I'm in contact with, who keeps asking me, when are we going to get this that you promised? You know, and I actually was one of those that stood up and said, you know, yes, we should do it for this year, but we haven't actually been able to deliver anything this year. And I just want, if I could ask Adam and Richard, you know, I see the words on page 87. Are they actually going to get a discount for this year, even if it's going to be next year before they get it? Is it actually going to cover this year? Adam, Richard?
Richard Weil.
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, clearly, I think the announcement from the Police and Crime Commission's perspective, the announcement was slightly ahead of their thinking in terms of how it actually is going to be implemented, but that has now been caught up. So on our website, there is a process, there's an application process, and it's all available. How it'll work is the constable who applies will have to demonstrate they've lived in the district for the period of this year, and they will be applied retrospectively from next year, but it will cover from April 21, but they can't apply in year for it now. They have to kind of earn their eligibility, and they will then retrospectively get the credit. So it is there, it is live, but it's almost a backward looking scheme rather than a kind of in the moment, which wasn't our thinking of how it would be done. But this is all at the behest of the Police and Crime Commissioner, because ultimately it's their scheme.
I mean, I understand that, and I say thank you for, you know, actually pushing ahead with it and getting something that hopefully is going to work. But once we've got over this year, and will next year's claims be in year, if I can put it that way, or are we always going to be a year behind?
It'll always be a year behind, because the thinking is, if you apply in year and then the day after you don't decide to be a special constable, then obviously the discount then has to be reversed. So it's almost, you have to earn it by residing in the district, and it'll be applied retrospectively all the time.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any other comments in the room? Yeah, I just have one comment. Sorry, Councillor Whittington.
Sorry, because I was going to raise a point on this one as well. Now, obviously, how does it potentially, because I'm guessing in terms of calculation, obviously, we might have a special constable who becomes a special constable mid-year, who might leave mid-year. I'm just or move. I'm just wondering, because obviously I'm aware of the fact, Richard, at the moment, I think the only 3 councils who've signed up to this are us. Is it South Holland and the county have signed up to it? So I was I'm just wondering, suppose at the moment we've got a special constable who lives in Fulbeck, in our district, and then moves to Leadenham, say, which is a couple of miles up the road, which is MK. And potentially, I'm just wondering how, and maybe sort of looking at Alan as well and Richard, there seems to me almost, because the other councils haven't adopted it, so kind of, I hate to use the word postcode lottery, but you know where I'm coming from, and you just wonder what we could do to try and persuade the other district councils. I mean, this is costing us £9,000 for 22 special constables, and I'm guessing the kind of impacts on some of the other councils. I assume Lincoln might be a little bit different, but I'm saying the rural councils. So I'm just wondering potentially what we could do, because at the moment it seems to be that potentially there could be some, some special constables in the county receiving and others not. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Alan Robinson.
So very quickly, Chairman. So you're right. My understanding is it's obviously a billing authority decision. So the county doesn't control whether this is applied. So it's on a billing authority by billing authority basis. And whilst we were still waiting for information prior to this meeting about one council, we know that the only one we're sure there's only one other district council who are currently paying this, as far as we're aware. As far as I'm aware, it's South Holland, but we still have some queries, don't we, outstanding around North Kesteven. We haven't managed to get their information back as yet, but it is something that isn't across all 7 districts. And the impact in the county, they just have to suck it up, because if the building authorities agree it, then that's affecting their budgets, and if they don't, it's not. But really, it's a matter. Obviously, the county are consultees on local council tax support, but they don't have the kind of veto or the ability to impose anything. So it's a billing authority by billing authority basis.
Okay, I'm going to ask the question that gets asked every time when this comes up. We bear 100% of the cost of recovery on this scheme, yet only take 9% of the loss. So again, the question that we ask every single time, have conversations gone in with LCC, who bear the majority of the loss, about them contributing towards us doing more recovery? And if they have, what responses have we been given? I think that's a question for Richard Wiles or Alan Robinson. Looks as if he wants to answer that one.
So this has been the case forever, so we've always done this while ever council tax has been in place. So council tax since 1993, that's always been the situation where you've got 2 tiers of councils, but it's a statutory obligation on district councils as the billing authorities to make its best endeavour to recover the monies. And whilst there have from time to time been negotiations with the county, I'm not aware of any in the last 12 months, Chairman, but they haven't borne any through. Sometimes they do help us financially with things like our single person discounts reviews and things like that benefit them in terms of increasing the tax base. But it's never been we've never had any support, and there's no kind of we're not feeling that there is likely to be any further support in terms of the recovery.
Well, again, as I say, I think thinking changes at all levels. The reality is we're not incentivized to spend on this. The county are. So I think a letter should go in on an annual basis to sort of say, what are you prepared to contribute to this? The answer to that might be 0, but they're the people that bear the biggest loss on this. So a letter should go in almost annually saying, what are you prepared to pay on this? But okay, I think I've reached that point. Are there any other comments and questions on this? Okay, so, sorry, Councillor Mull.
If I just wanted to go back, if I may, to the questionnaire that was sent out. I'm surprised at the low level of responses when you can't weigh that up against the number of people dependent really on the scheme. I think that's quite shocking. I just wondered if we understand why that might be. Is there an issue regarding perhaps the communication? Or I appreciate that obviously there's only so much you can do, but I appreciate looking at the questionnaire, the pie charts, things like that don't necessarily appeal or are understood by everyone. And I'm just wondering if maybe that's what the issue was. But do we have any feedback about that?
Alan Roberts.
Yeah, so this is, unfortunately, Councillor Morgan, that is typical of these surveys around this particular topic. I guess part of that is that this is broadly the same scheme we've had since 2013. So we're saying, do you still want to maintain the status quo? It perhaps feels a bit of people feel like, well, just leave it as it is. It's fine, because maybe those people who are dependent on it may be more concerned if it was being made less generous. We may get a better response then. But actually, what we're proposing is to maintain the status quo. So I suspect that's the reason for that. Do you know what? It would be great if we could make this more simple. But this scheme and the way it's set up is really complex. So it's impossible to make this a really simple review, I'm afraid.
Well, the working age, the only really eligible group that would feed back is the working age group, because the pensioners are outside of any scheme changes. They are a protected group anyway. So actually what you're looking at is 11% return, which I actually personally think is pretty good for, as Alan describes it, it's a no change scheme. I think if we're significantly reducing the level of support, you'd probably get more of a reaction. But because we're recommending an as is, then I don't think 11% return is bad.
Fine.
Yeah.
Councillor Dilks.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. It's just very briefly, if I can be helpful, just on the, you were right, of course, that under the special constable concession, it only costs us 9% of the overall cost, which actually makes it, that's why it makes it such good value for money for us in a way. But the county has agreed to pick up the rest of as I understand it, of any of the specials that do apply right across the county if their districts had joined the scheme. Am I wrong, Richard? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And then the other thing to remember, of course, is that part of the percentage will be picked up by the police part of the council tax. But thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to make some progress, please. So moving on to item 9 on the agenda, and this is with Councillor Stokes.
Come back to agenda item 8, because obviously there is a recommendation on page 83 that needs recommending to Cabinet for Tuesday. So I'm just wondering if you can.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I thought it was an observation. Okay, thank you for that. Do I have a proposer for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Whittington. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Morgan. All those in favour? Any against? And any abstentions? That has been approved, and thank you for pointing that out, Councillor Stokes. Moving forward, item 9, the rent guarantee scheme. This is with Andrew Cotton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So a report for committee on rent guarantee scheme. This has been on the committee's work programme for this year. Rather than just focusing on rent guarantee scheme, the report seeks to give some context around homelessness within the district, particularly in relation to the private rented sector, both in terms of homeless presentations from the private rented sector and our ability as a housing authority to satisfy our homelessness duty by accommodating in the private rented sector. So in terms of the report, just to pick out some of the key points to assist committee on page 104, the very sort of high level facts and figures in terms of homelessness presentations and the number of homelessness cases where the council has a full duty to support the applicant. The causes of homelessness are detailed there as well. Clearly 2020/21 is somewhat of an outlier through the COVID pandemic and what was referred to as the eviction ban from both the private rented sector and social housing sectors. The next page of the report on page 105 of the pack just turns to give some more detail in terms of the private rented sector, the number of homelessness cases from the private rented sector, and our ability to prevent or relieve homelessness, and also the numbers that where we're satisfying our homelessness duty by accommodating in the private rented sector. There is a caveat on that in the sense that we can only say that we have satisfied our duty with a 12-month tenancy into the private rented sector, which is quite unusual. So we will have some applicants accommodated on a 6-month assured short-held tenancy, but they won't be reflected in these figures. We do talk then at the bottom of the page about the use of the private rented sector to alleviate homelessness. And then we turn on to discuss on page 106 some of the current initiatives that the council's engaged with. And I'd highlight section 3.2 there in relation to a private landlord willing to engage with us and us, in effect, providing some financial assistance through the Flexible Homelessness Support Grant, and in return being able to nominate into the landlord's property. Section 3.3 covers the rent deposit scheme that we run. I have to say that in terms of other rent deposit schemes I'm familiar with, I'd describe this as a success. This can be used at any point, not just when we have a full duty to alleviate homelessness, but in effect, rather than being a rent guarantee scheme, just for absolute clarity, this is a loan that the council provides for up to 1 month's rent in advance, and also 1 month's rent for deposit. And there's some figures there in the table at 3.4. There's a number of other initiatives that are detailed in the report, but on page 107, section 4, we then talk and give some information on rent guarantee schemes. Research shows this isn't an area that councils are particularly highly involved in. There's a couple of local authorities that we've been able to find that have introduced schemes like this. And there's detail there at section 4.1. I think there would be two issues, sort of headline issues for us in relation to us underwriting rent in the private rented sector. The first is the appetite for private landlords to be interested in that scheme. With a buoyant housing market, they can let their properties at a high, at a market rent without our involvement. Secondly is the level of financial risk that we would potentially be exposed to with any such scheme. And thank you to the section 151 for providing some comment on that as well. Very much a whistle-stop tour of the report, Chairman, but hopefully that just provides some helpful pointers, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Councillor Whittington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The first thing is, I just realised I used to be a private rented landlord in Grantham, and my DPI form still shows that, but the properties have been sold as of about 3 weeks ago. So my DPI, just for clarity, my DPI form is actually out of date, so it's reminding me I need to update that. But in view of the fact that my DPI form still has got that interest, I won't take part in this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you. I've got very strong interest in this particular issue. I actually brought it to our senior housing officer some time ago. There was an issue emerging, I don't know about elsewhere across the district, but certainly in Grantham, where private landlords were actually moving away from renting out properties. And they are our safety net, basically, for we can't meet the needs of everyone. Therefore, whether we like it or not, we become dependent on them. Because of a number of issues, they're basically selling their properties and just getting the income back. It's interesting what Councillor Whittington's just said, actually. The result of that being a reduction in availability of private rented housing. So a scheme like this is extremely important to try and retain those private landlords, because the option otherwise is nowhere for these people to live. And so I think this is an extremely important safety net. It does incur risk on the council or any local authority involved in it. It's almost kind of the point in a way, because otherwise that risk would be sitting with the private landlord if, for example, rents aren't paid, etc. So I feel quite strongly that we should support this being, implemented and continuing to push this forward.
A point of information from Mark Whittington.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Morgan. I'd just like to confirm for the record that when I disposed of the private rented property, it was the sitting tenant who purchased it. Thank you.
Councillor Dawson.
I have to declare an interest because I have both commercial and private rented property. I am not about to sell any. I have good tenants. They pay their rent and they look after the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions and comments in the room? I have a couple of observations. So the way I read this, and if you just correct me if I've misread this, although we don't have a formal rental guarantee, we retain the flexibility within our offices to address some of the issues that a formal scheme would have. I think that's kind of the summary. The second observation I'd just like to get your comments on, page 105, the number of homeless people coming forward. I accept your point that we can discount year 2021 because of legal changes in the sector. But we're up to in 7 months, we're up to 87% of the number of homeless people presented in 2019-20. Now, assuming that they report in a straight linear line, that's a 50% increase. We'll be at 350 by the end of the financial year. Is that what you're seeing, or is it or is it an irrelevant assumption to say they present in a straight line across the year? Are we seeing a 50% increase in homelessness in our district? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in relation to observation 1, but yes, absolutely. I think your impression is correct. In relation to the presentations from the private rented sector, clearly there's peaks and troughs. It's not a straight line through the year. It's also partly related. I think there would have been some pressure, if you like, building up within the legal process because of the eviction ban over the last 12 months. And in effect, that came off in May. So there has been quite a backlog in terms of Section 21 notices being served and legal action being taken. So just some caution in terms of those figures. I think there's also, in the context of why landlords move out of the private rented sector, I think in the context of a housing market like we've got in South Kesteven, I wouldn't see that as some landlords not being able to let their properties or not being able to get a good market rent return. I think anecdotally we're seeing landlords move out of the sector because they want to realise the asset and dispose of the property for one reason or another. So clearly a rent guarantee scheme wouldn't explicitly help with that. And I think as you've already made the comment, we've got some of that flexibility with the existing rent deposit scheme that we offer.
I'm going to push you on my second question there, because if I offset the reduction from 2021, we're still looking at a 22% increase in homelessness potentially across the year. Your staff would notice that. Are they reporting increased workload of that sort of level of homelessness across the district?
Yes. I mean, clearly the numbers don't lie, do they? In that sense, absolutely. The workload has increased. I think that we've also seen, the team deliver some quite strong efficiencies in terms of the use of temporary accommodation, for example, where they've reduced the time people are spending in temporary accommodation from around 90 days to 60 days, which is really good. And we're not an outlier in terms of what's happening across, England and Wales in the sense of homeless presentations. There's nothing stand out in terms of our experience as a district. I think other local authorities are seeing similar sort of pressures, but we are containing that within existing resource and budget.
Okay, are there any other questions and comments on this report? Okay, so I'd like to make some progress, but I will take some closing comments. Thank you, Councillor Morgan.
I mean, my view is that our housing officers have a difficult enough job to do as it is, which I think you've touched on. The scheme gives them another tool to use. And I think the more help we can give them, along with helping the landlords and helping our residents who most need help, who are the most vulnerable, for whom the other option is potentially the street, is extremely important. When I first looked at this, actually it was in a broader context. We very much focused in on what our legal obligation is around here, but that's only part of the picture. The other aspect of it is that there are people out there, significant number in our population, just touched on the £1,700 hit their households are about to get, who are likely to be struggling. And I think if you look moving forward, the predictions are we are going to start seeing a hell of a lot more pressure on this particular area. And I certainly know a number of the housing charities like Shelter are saying that there are going to be increases in people facing homelessness. So I think anything that we can do to support those people, we should do if we possibly can. So I would like to go for the preferred option 2, which is that we do pursue this and we do whatever is required to implement it.
Okay, we can look at this returning to the committee in 6 months, I think, to or within the constraints of the work programme. But okay, if there are no further comments on this, Okay, moving on to item 10, the work programme. Are there any comments on the work programme? Mark and I will be going through the work programme straight after this meeting. Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just as you referred to the meeting we're having after this to go through the work programme items, the ones that are unscheduled, because there's quite a few of them. And one of the options we may consider could be an extra meeting of this committee to address some of those. But I think we'll know fully once we've been through the outstanding items. Thank you.
Fine. Are there any other comments on the work programme? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 11. Are there any other items of business in the room? Any other items of business? There are no other items of business. So it's 3 minutes past 12. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you.